Welcome to BIB Today, the daily business podcast from the newsroom of business in Vancouver. I'm Kirk LaPointe, publisher and editor-in-chief. Canadian businesses have, generally speaking, suffered enormously during the pandemic. Despite subsidies at federal and provincial levels, they report a once-in-a-lifetime disruption to their operations. That being said, they remain committed to investment and they see opportunities, albeit with challenges that have to be overcome. My guest today is Pete Molenaar. He is the Senior Vice President and Head of Commercial Banking for Western Canada at HSBC Bank Canada. HSBC's recent Navigator survey of businesses identified some of the priorities in the time ahead. I want to talk about that. Good to have you with us.
Thanks, Kirk.
Let's start with the mood of business out there. It's a little rattled, but how do you assess the general mood of business?
Yeah, it's a great question. I would almost answer it in sort of two ways. You know, we had the timeline initially when COVID hit and the lockdown happened in early spring. Businesses were generally retrenching, deferring any expansion, and really just trying to get their business in the best shape they could in terms of liquidity. As we went through the summer, cases started to get under control. We started to see businesses start to invest in those areas that they had put on the back burner. So the mood has certainly shifted over the spring and into the summer. But now, with cases resurging, 46% of our respondents said that the resurgence of COVID is certainly the biggest threat to their growth.
So is there a kind of a backlog of investment that's just waiting for that light at the end of the tunnel?
We've seen some of that, just in talking from a banker's perspective, we've seen some of that. But when you look at the Navigator survey as well, 81% of respondents actually believe that we will be back to pre-COVID profitability by the end of 22, and 1/5 of those respondents believe it'll happen this year. So there is a lot of focus on what's up next. International trade, 2/3 are expecting that to pick up as well. But from just the bank perspective, we've seen that over the summer months that investment has happened, and into the fall as well, we're seeing more transactions taking place. So I'd say that there was a bit of a backlog, and I expect that to continue.
So what do you think the conditions are in general that businesses are seeking in order to have their operations be more optimal now?
Again, that's I'm always answering these to say it depends, but with the environment that we're in right now, I think that the optimal piece is still being developed. But when we look at companies looking forward, I mentioned already 67% of them expect international trade to increase, but we're also seeing businesses focus a lot on where the future lies, and that's upskilling their employees, investing in technology and automation. In BC specifically, 41% of our businesses talk about customer experience enhancements, 38% into automation and efficiency, and 31% more focusing on processes and so on and so forth. The other piece I'll say quickly, Kirk, too, here is that when we start to get to that optimal sort of investment, a lot of companies are also really turning to environmental and sustainability as an investment for them going forward. So we're starting to see investment in people, automation, technology, and environmental sustainability and social responsibility as being big outcomes in the next year or two.
Those sound not terribly pessimistic, though, in an overall sense, Pete. It sounds as if businesses are ready to come at it again, providing that there are certain things that get overcome, or certain challenges that can be overcome. What do you think are their main concerns still standing in the way in all this?
Well, again, sectoral, it depends on sector. So we've seen a lot of businesses really perform strongly fairly early on in pandemic. When you start to look at the travel and tourism, the smaller retail businesses, and the food and beverage areas, I think there's a lot of uncertainty there yet, and they're looking for continued support from government. I think the CEBA, Canadian Emergency Business Account, has been very successful with those. But when you look at the large, other businesses that are focusing on trade and expansion, they are looking more for stability of supply chains. And
Okay.
while there was some disruption in that early on, we're starting to see the return to international business, international supply, and companies actually looking to expand into those marketplaces. So there has been some certainty brought back into the market, and we're starting to see that where in the survey as well, where a lot of our customers are focusing, 2/3 of them, in fact, into those global international markets.
It is a little bit surprising about the trade picture, about the trade outlook that some of the companies had, because you'll recall that one of the first things that we began to look at when the pandemic struck was the supply chain and how precarious it seemed to be at times, and perhaps it being time to perhaps bring repatriate a lot of the supply chain and bring it back closer to home so that businesses would not be so disrupted. Do you think, in general, again, businesses have shifted back to where they were pre-pandemic and thinking that these supply chains, international trade, part of the global economy, all of those pieces still matter very much?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, early, again, it's all about timing, right? So early on in the pandemic, there was a retracing back to more intra-regional trade. We've seen that happening. Now in the survey, businesses actually see that decreasing in favor of more global trade. So, I'll quote our head of trade for HSBC was on a B&M Bloomberg interview, I think about a week ago. And so I would say that her view is more of what we see more current. And the definite trend, there was a reshoring for a period of time, and then it went to a diversification strategy very quickly. So where traditional supply chains were disrupted, there was a diversification to find ways around it. And in fact, now we're actually viewing to a degree that this has been accelerated significantly in the last few months, to the point where we see global trade being down about 9% across the organization. This isn't just specific to Canada, but it does apply, versus it was around 12% in the 2008-2009 financial crisis. So there is a shift back to that global supply chain, and there's significant mid-market opportunity in Asia and China that a lot of our customers and in the survey are focused on.
Yeah. Is it still going to await, though, the ability for business people to travel, to scout out these opportunities, to do the deals there, or are you starting to see more of a virtual transaction approach taking place, where businesses just can't wait for the resumption of full-on business travel in order to do this?
Yeah, that's a good question. My view of the trade that we're seeing sort of resurge now is largely probably based on traditional relationships that have happened. Okay. When we look at companies, in particular in BC, focusing on the future, one of the biggest areas that they focus on is expansion and new customers, and a lot of that's going to come through the globalization trade piece. So it would be more of a personal view, Kirk, if I had to say. I mean, we talk to a lot of clients that deal globally. Just was on a call with one yesterday. He is doing a lot of his business virtually, but he still values very much the in-person relationship building. And so I think that's going to continue to play a big part. And it may play a part as we start to look at this, this trend to go back to global trade and expand into those markets. It may be a requirement for companies to actually go back to that. But I don't have any specific data on that per se. It's more of a personal thought.
Obviously, governments like to believe anyway that they have some responsibility in trade environment that we have in the world, and I wonder whether your survey here is any kind of a message to government about what it needs to do in terms of resuming its efforts, and particularly with the new British Columbian government installed now, whether it needs to start really expressing a greater degree of priority on the trade picture.
Yeah, I mean, generally we as an organization support, whatever, government does to, with whether it's with regards to the programs that they put in place or global trade. I mean, we just announced the UK-Canada agreement, which is great news. The first country to do that with the UK. Obviously, we as an organization have 150 years of experience in that market, and so we applaud that. We've applauded the CETA agreement, the Trans-Pacific agreements, and so on and so forth. So, I think there's going to have to be a shift at some point, Kirk. We're very focused on supporting businesses through the pandemic right now, I think, at a government level, which is, I think, where it needs to be. But I definitely think that shift will happen. We see EDC and very active yet and still promoting that, so that there's a bit of a story there that continues to happen.
Yeah. And I wonder again, back to the point about the investments that businesses appear ready to make rather soon. Where would you think the greatest opportunities will be then for businesses in terms of making their investments and in essentially getting a rather quick turnaround in terms of a boost to their own operations?
Yeah, and again, I go to the survey, and so I rely a lot on what our businesses have said to us, and it comes back to the employee upskilling, comes back to the technology, piece of the business, and then I recall the third one as being the environmental sustainability piece. That's where they are focusing a lot of their efforts right now, and that's what they're indicating where, those are the things that they see as being important for building their business. The value around the environmental and social sustainability piece has really come through in the last 6 months. And so, what that looks like exactly, I think is still yet to be seen. I think there's still some of the story to play out, but that's where we're seeing the indications are early.
But would you say at least that this survey is suggesting that businesses have really overcome any sense at all that, say, 2021 is going to be like 2019? They really do believe this has been a game-changing event, and that they're going to have to do some serious rethinking about moving forward.
Yeah, I think the rethinking is coming around more about, and I don't want to keep coming back to this environmental sustainability piece, but, as I said earlier too, 81% of them expect to be pre-COVID profitability by the end of 2022. And then 1/5 of them expect to be there this year, in fact, which was quite to me, an outstanding part of the survey. So there's a lot of optimism. In terms of things that they have to do differently to make 2021 look like 2019, I have a lot of faith. What I have found in my job and also what I see in the survey is I have a lot of faith in the Canadian business landscape, from small to larger operations. What they've shown in the ability to pivot, to adapt to the change, and the resilience that they've shown, I do believe that when conditions are right, they will be able to capitalize. And it's so much showing through in the survey, but I'm also seeing it just in my day-to-day conversations. I think it's something we all can be very proud of as Canadians.
You use the terms, though, when conditions are right. And last thing I want to ask you is what do you think will be those correct conditions? Is it that a majority of Canadians in certain centers will have been vaccinated? What do you see as the optimal climate here?
Yeah, and it's a question that's not covered in the survey. A lot of the survey is, and I will divert off the survey to answer your question. A lot of the survey is sort of feelings going forward. Let's face it. I mean, with the second wave happening, Alberta's just put in some new, basically lockdown. BC is managing better. We see what's happening in Ontario. I haven't heard this from business owners, but I'm sure if I ask them, we need to get back to more regular, social, getting back to what normal is, and it's going to be different. But we've seen in the summer months, once we understood the virus better and people started coming back to the economy, what it did. And so I think to get back to any sense of normal, vaccines have to play a role. Obviously, the markets have shown that. And, I think most business owners would say that that's a key to the success going forward. I think a lot of what the survey was around was there's probably some assumptions in there that those things would happen, which I'm sure reflected because the survey was done in September, October. So I believe that some of those expectations from clients are based on that.
But to conclude, it sounds as if once there are these optimal conditions, we're going to see a real surge?
You know, listen, I believe that there's a great opportunity coming, and you know, we'll have to wait and see what happens. You know, I think the Canadian business landscape is ready to go. I think the market or the survey has shown there's a lot of resilience and optimism. I personally think that there's a light at the end of the tunnel, and so there's some good opportunity for our Canadian businesses to excel. I think international trade will come back. I refer back to, again, some of the stuff that we're seeing in our trade business, that it's actually accelerating. And so, you know, I have to believe that when society gets more back to normal, we'll start to see some strength, even further than what we've seen today.
Well, I really appreciate your candor about this, and not just in discussing the survey, but some of the implications for it, Pete. It's always good to have you with us. Thanks for your time today.
I appreciate it. Thank you, Kirk.
Pete Molenaar is the Senior Vice President and Head of Commercial Banking for Western Canada at HSBC Bank Canada. I'm Kirk LaPointe, Publisher and Editor-in-Chief of Business in Vancouver. Thanks a lot for watching BIV today. We'll see you again.